This is what my morning commute looks like. I leave my house before the sun comes up. I drive for an hour, 70 miles, and I arrive at work before the sun comes up. And it's really boring. Very boring. Cars can be a really boring way to commute sometimes.
You know what isn't a boring way to commute to work? A motorcycle.
This is a motorcycle from 1982. It's got 4 cylinders, 4 carburetors, it's about 40 years old, and I want to try and drive it 140 miles a day to work and back, for some reason. If you were hoping this upload was going to be another Cummins Explorer video, then I understand and I apologize for that. Just know that I've got lots more coming soon on that, but for now I figured since I was working on the motorcycle anyways, some video is better than no video. The issue is that this thing needs a lot of work. I've already put a bunch of work into it. There's some really important stuff left over before it's actually ready to be a reliable commuter, as reliable as this piece of junk's ever going to be. I'm sure there's plenty of people who'll be saying this is a terrible choice, and you're not wrong, it is. But I already owned this motorcycle, so it was free. Free's the right price, which makes it the right choice. I've already done a bunch of work to this thing off camera. I've been through the carburetors, I've given it new tires front and back, I fabricated a new battery mount so I could put an oversized battery in this thing to try and make it start a little more reliably. Put a new alternator in it. There's a few remaining issues though. Listen to what happens when I run the starter on this thing. So if you listen to the starter in this thing, it seems like most of the time that it's spinning, it's not actually turning the engine, it's just sitting there spinning. And as far as I can tell, that's exactly what happens. On motorcycles like this, the starter actually has a one-way clutch on the crankshaft of the engine, and that one-way clutch makes it so that the starter engages when it's supposed to and it doesn't engage when it isn't supposed to. And mine isn't making it so it engages when it's supposed to, only sometimes. So I need to start taking the engine apart and figuring out what's wrong with that one-way clutch. On many motorcycles, it's not that big of a deal because the starter clutch just sits on the end of the alternator here somewhere like that. That's easy to get to. On this motorcycle, however, Honda already put 4 cylinders side by side sitting here. They didn't want to make the engine even wider. As you can see, this is already the widest point. So Honda opted, rather than doing that, to stuff it deeper in the bowels of the engine.
If you were to follow the factory procedure to replace this starter clutch, you would pull the engine out of the frame, crack the engine case in half, and then replace it that way. However, it's technically possible to do it without doing all of this work, and that's what I'm going to show you in this video. How can I replace the starter clutch in a CB650 Nighthawk with the engine in the frame?
I'm not going to try and drag out this project. I really want to get back to working on the Explorer, but I figured let's test the waters. Let's see if YouTube likes bikes. And if I'm working on it anyways, I might as well make a video about it. In order to get to the starter clutch, I need to pull the actual clutch apart, which sits here on the right-hand side of the bike. I'm not trying to do a clutch on this bike, so I don't want to disassemble this whole clutch pack. I just want to pull the clutch pack out in order to get at what's behind it. So I'm going to try and pull this out as one unit without disassembling it. If you were doing a clutch, obviously you'd want to pull that apart. Once I have the preload springs and that little shaft with the bearing out, the next thing is this little lock nut deal here that I need to get off. Now, all the manuals say that you need a special tool to get this off. Typically on nuts like this, you can just put something up against one of the castellations on it, give that a smack, and usually you can loosen it that way. This is how you can remove this without the special tool. Next, we're pulling the oil pan so we can actually get to the starter clutch underneath it. That looks like a Jaguar symbol to me. Maybe it's something different, but was my Honda motorcycle oil pan made by Jaguar?
The second interesting thing I found, a broken off head of a bolt. So that's concerning. This makes me worry that somebody already tried to do this job and failed and just bolted it back together and gave up. Guess we'll see. All right, my goal right now is to get this shaft slid out of here so I can get the starter clutch that's on the other side of that. In order to do that, it looks like there's 3 bolts. One here, and then one way up here. If I pull those out, hopefully this shaft just slides out this way. Another small note, if you take this little ignition cover off, there's a bolt in here that you can use to turn the engine if you ever need to turn the engine. There's a little needle bearing that comes out with that shaft. Make sure you keep it. Now we get to the secret sauce. This is the whole reason that it's even possible to replace the starter clutch without pulling the whole engine. If I look through this hole here, I can see a Torx 30 bolt. If I rotate the engine, I can get to each of the 3 Torx 30 bolts that are on the starter clutch. Now, because I can undo those Torx 30 bolts, I can take the starter clutch apart while it's still up in the engine in order to pull it out. So this is a bottom side view of the starter clutch. The clutch itself is here and the gear that drives it is here. You can see this part of the case would normally block this from coming out. The only way we can get it out is if we separate this gear from the starter clutch here by unscrewing the bolts through these holes. Otherwise, this would not be able to come out with the engine in the car because this gear runs into the casing. My bolts were stripped, so this wasn't quite working, but even if your bolts are stripped, I figured out a way to make this work. I'm using this guy. What this is they call it an impact screwdriver or something. You put it on the screw and you smack the end of it with a hammer. And when you do that, when you smack it, it rotates it. And what that means is that it's forcing itself into the screw with the hammer effect while it's rotating. These are amazing for removing stripped screws. It's also useful in my case because this gear wrench one, if I pull the tip off, it's just got a normal 3/8 drive. So I can throw some adapters on it, go to my Torx bit, and I was actually using that impact screwdriver to break these loose. I can actually pry these two apart quite a bit so that I can make some room to get my tool in the front. So I can take my Torx bit, put it in that top hole, use my screwdriver to maneuver the gear until I can actually get it in. This is the little monster that all that fuss was about. So, a word to the wise, if you're going to do this, get not only a ball end Torx 30, which this is not anymore because the ball end broke off. Get not only a ball end Torx 30, also get an impact driver Torx 30 because obviously this was not strong enough for me to be using the impact screwdriver. On top of that, use an impact screwdriver. Maybe you'll get lucky and your bolts weren't as stripped as mine, but don't be a masochist. Don't put yourself through doing this job without a tool like this because they are so useful. This is the one-way clutch. Now you can see why it's so difficult to get these bolts out because that bolt, it runs into the gear here. So the objective is you need to put this in such a spot that you can pry the gear away from it to try to get a straight shot in there because when the gear is flat like that, you can't get in there. So you put a screwdriver between them, pry it out, and then you can get your bit in. So this little guy is a one-way clutch. It's got these pins here.
it's got pins that come out this way, and then behind these pins there's a spring that returns it. And it's free to rotate this way just fine, but if you try and rotate it the other way, it jams against those pins. There's a little ramp here, and when you try and rotate it the other way, it jams against the pins and you can't rotate it. So that's the way that this thing works. This one seems to be working fine, which is obviously somewhat concerning, but I'm probably just not putting enough torque on it. And this guy here looks to be an alignment pin. So when you put it back together, you got 3 bolt holes, an alignment pin, and then you make sure you have 3 of these pins, 3 of those pins, and 3 springs, and that's what this mechanism is made out of. Now, what I assumed was going to be the problem was either the little springs, which I have some new springs here. There's the Honda part number if you need it. And then I also got more of these lateral pins as well. And that part number is here. And I'm hoping that the problem is somewhere in there and not on these because I didn't get new ones of these. So let's pull this apart and take a look at it and see what the issue is. I would recommend at a minimum getting these. They're only a couple dollars each. So I'm going to take the alignment pin out. Then I can pull this off of here. You can see these are allowed to move in there like that. And the closer they get here, the more they push up against this center hub, which is what locks it. Oh, notice that is not forcing it this way very much, so that could be my problem right there. That's probably supposed to force it all the way in, but it has kind of low pressure. So that is the lateral pin. This is the little spring. It's like a ballpoint pen spring. So one small thing I've already noticed about this is there's actually quite a bit of wear down in here. The Spike only has 11,000 miles on it, but I can already see that there's a bunch of wear there. So I might see if there's any way to clean that up. And I also noticed on these pins earlier, some of them have quite a bit of wear here, which is concerning. I'll try to clean it up a little bit, but that is a little nasty. And it's possible that that's what happened, is that was sticking there. So that bit of wear there might have been my issue. So I took a look inside the engine to where this interfaces on the next gear in the transmission, and it's definitely a little bit tight in there. So I'm going to try to clean that surface up really well, clean up the surface in the engine, and maybe this pin not being able to slide, it's very possible that that was my issue, as it was just getting hung up. And this type of wear, to me, what it looks like is that this thing actually rusted onto there. It kind of looks like a galling or rusting or something, and so it's entirely possible my starter clutch went bad just because I haven't ridden it in forever and these pins rusted onto their surfaces. There's very obvious rust and corrosion issues. This is why you start your stuff every so often. You don't just let it sit, because then this stuff gets worse. It would have been covered in oil if I just run it every now and then. Let's put this back together. You want these to move nice and free. Good solid thunk. All right, all these little sprags move nice and free. It locks up really good and tight. It's time to put this back together. I'm about to figure out whether that fixed the starter or whether I have to do that whole thing all over again. So let's see what happens. It's definitely better. I don't know if it's totally fixed though.
Unfortunately, the bike never started. It seems to be electrical issues. The spark seems a little bit weak, and there seems to be an intermittent short. I have parts on order to try and fix that, but for now at least, the starter clutch seems to be working better than it was, so I'll call that a success even though the bike itself didn't start. Next time it'll be another Cummins Explorer video, so if you're interested in that, then subscribe and stick around. Thank you for watching this video, and I hope to see you next time.